Welcome to The Story Apothecary, a podcast filled with healing and medicinal stories. My name is Nana Tomova, and I'm a traditional storyteller and a pharmacist, and stories are medicines which I dispense. In this podcast, you'll find my prescriptions of stories for the body, mind, heart, soul, and for the earth. So I invite you to join me as we enter the healing world of stories together. Hello and welcome to the story for June, 4th of June to be exact. And today is the day that Bulgarian Folktales, my book, is being released. And I'm so excited and thrilled to have it out in the world. It's been many months in the making. I've included some of my favourite stories, some of them that you've heard on this podcast, some of them that you have heard me tell for many years. All of them translated by me, word by word, from Bulgarian to English. There's been a real relationship building with the material. And as I speak in the introduction of the book, it has been painful in some ways to take away the original tongue, the original language of the story, to make it available in English. That I was not prepared for. It almost floored me. And the book is beautiful. I hope you enjoy reading it. And I wanted to share with you the story that actually made me want to write the book. I read it 4 or 5 years ago, and it stayed with me. It's a Korean story, and although I've been telling European stories now, and that's the choice I've made for quite a few years, I wanted to make an exception and share this particular tale. There is something beautiful in it. There is something about giving and letting go of the stories that I treasure so close to my heart. And I hope you enjoy the story. And I hope you enjoy the book. I will leave a link of where to buy it from if you're in the UK or worldwide. Here is the Korean story of The Story Bag. There was once a very rich family. They had not many children. In fact, they only had one child, a boy, a son. And this boy, he loved to have tales told to him, stories every night shared in the family home. And whenever he even met a new person, he would always ask them, "Tell me a story, but tell me a different story." You see, stories are meant to be repeated, to be told over and over again, but this wee lad, he liked a different story each time. And in his hand, he would carry a small bag around his belt, a beautiful bag of leather and cloth. And whenever he heard a new story told to him, he would take that story and put it in the bag and then tie the bag so the story could not get out. And then carry the story bag on his belt on all his walks and all his travels. So many tales did he hear. Soon that beautiful bag was packed so tight He had to push it hard to get all the stories in, push their heads down and pack another one and then tie the string tight. He wanted to make sure that none of the stories escaped. And always the bag was kept tightly at its mouth. And the stories stayed. And years rolled by like pebbles, like stones. And eventually that boy grew into a very handsome young man. And of course, time came for him to take a wife, to marry, to start his own family. And a bride was chosen for him as per custom. The whole house was preparing to greet this young woman, the woman that would be this man's new wife. Everything was an uproar. Everything was chaos. There was so much preparation to be made, so much things to be cooked, to be cleaned, to be sorted. Happiness and chaos together. Now, in this home, there was an old servant that has served the family for many years. So many years since the time that wee story-loving boy was still very young. He had seen him take his first steps. The servant had seen him speak his first words, reach out his hands. For all the big moments of his life, the servant had been there. And so he was there now too, as the household was getting ready for the young man's wedding. And the servant was tending a fire on the kitchen hearth, when suddenly his ears heard a very faint whispering sounds coming from somewhere. He stood very still and scanned the room with his ears, listened to which corner of the house the sound was coming, and then he discovered that the voices were in fact coming from a bag hanging on the wall, a bag of cloth and leather, very tightly tied at the mouth. It was, of course, the bag of stories which the young man had kept in his childhood always at his belt. And now it hung forgotten on an old hook on the kitchen wall. The old servant approached on tiptoes and listened very carefully. He heard the voices coming from the bag. "Listen, everyone," said the first voice. "Is the boy's wedding to take place tomorrow? He has kept us this long while stuffed in this bag. We're packed so closely we can hardly breathe, so closely we are so uncomfortable together. We have suffered a very long time. And now we must take revenge. We must make him pay for this one way or another." "Yes," said another voice coming from the bag. "I have been thinking this exact same thing," said the second voice. "Tomorrow, I know that the young man will leave by horse to bring home his bride, and I will change into bright young berries, oh, so beautiful and so beguiling and so delicious, ripening by the roadside, and there I shall wait. He will not be able to resist me, but I will be red berries full of poison, and as he eats me, I shall kill him." "Ah, yes," piped up a third voice, "and if he doesn't die after eating the berries, then I should become a clear bubbling spring by the roadside. I shall have a beautiful gourd dipper floating in me just at the right moment. When he sees me, he will feel so thirsty, a thirst so deep that must be quenched immediately. And then when I get inside of him as that water, I shall make him suffer terribly. So badly that he will forget his own name, suffer so terribly that he will forget where he came from and who he is. And a fourth voice joined in the choir. If you fail, the voice said, then I shall become an iron skewer, heated red hot. I shall hide in the bag of chaff that will be placed by his horse for him to dismount on when he reaches the bride's home. And then when he steps on me, I shall burn his feet so badly, and he will die. And you see, in those times, according to the custom of those lands, a bag of chaff was always placed by the bridegroom's horse, so that he would not have to step directly on the ground. And by a blessing, made this way to follow a custom, it would in fact be a curse. And then a fifth voice came from the bag. And if this failed too, the voice said, that I shall become those poisonous string snakes, thin as threads. And then I will hide in the bridal chamber. And when the bride and the bridegroom have gone to sleep, I shall slither out and bite a venomous bite that would leave them both dead. The voices were pleased with themselves. The servant saw the bag slightly wiggle as all the stories were jumping around, excited to finally be allowed to be free. The servant was filled with such alarm. His heart was full of anguish and sorrow for the young master that he had witnessed, helped, and been with for so many years. How awful, he said. I will not let any harm come to that young man. When he leaves the house tomorrow, the servant said to himself, I must take the bridle and lead the horse myself. No matter what happens to me, I will not let him come to harm. Early in the morning, as the sun was rising and the final preparations were completed for the feast and the wedding, everything was ready. The groom was dressed in his best clothes, his best attire, his shoes polished. He came out of the house and mounted his horse. And suddenly, out of nowhere, his faithful servant came running and grabbed the horse's bridle. And then he was asked to be allowed to lead the horse. And the young man refused. No, I must go and get my bride on this horse, he said. But the old master just shook his head. You have other work to do. You better stay behind. No, you don't understand. I must lead the horse today. No, refuted the servant. I don't care what happens, but I insist that I take the bridle. The servant refused to listen to anyone. And finally the young man, surprised at the old man's behavior, allowed him to lead the horse to the bride's home. And as the procession wound a long way around, finally they came to this open field, and the sun was hot. There was so much dust thrown onto the path, and the bridegroom spotted by the roadside juicy, red, ripe berries that were growing. Oh, his mouth watered at once. He wanted to taste one to quench his thirst of the sweetness and the beauty of his juicy red berries. And wait, he said, as he wanted to reach his hand and take one between his fingers. Wait, stop the horse. I want some of those red berries. and he closed his eyes and already started to imagining the taste. But the servant would not stop the horse. In fact, he made the horse purposefully carry on. "Oh, those berries," said the servant. "You can find them anywhere. Just be a little patient. I shall pick some for you later." He gave the horse a good crack of the whip, and the horse sped on and galloped across the dusty road. The young man had never seen his servant behave in such a way. But he said nothing. He had more important things to think about. His thirst now unquenched. Such a warm day, his mouth parched, feeling like sandpaper, they came across to a bubbling brook. Its clear waters seemed so cool and tempting and sweet. There was even a small gourd dipper floating at the water just at the moment that they passed. So inviting, as if to say, "Stop, have a drink, quench your thirst." "Bring me some of that water," said the bridegroom to the servant. "I've been thirsty for such a long time. You wouldn't let me eat the berries. Now at least you bring me some water." But again the servant whipped the horse, and the horse galloped even faster. "Once we get into the shade of the trees," said the servant, "your thirst will soon disappear." And the horse carried forth. The bridegroom shook his head. "What is wrong with my servant?" he said. He grumbled and mumbled. He was in a bad mood. But the servant, of course, took no notice, normally so careful to every mood of his master. But this time he turned the other way, and the horses carried on. And finally they reached the home of the bride. Now already gathered in the yard was a large crowd of people, waiting. And a servant led the horse into the compound and stopped it behind the waiting bag of chaff. And the bridegroom, knowing what the custom is, put down his foot to dismount, but the servant pretended to stumble and shoved the bridegroom to keep him from stepping on the bag. It was a shameful affair. The bridegroom fell into the straw and tumbled onto the mats laid on the ground, shuffled, and bright red. Such a shame at his clumsy fall. The moment he was welcoming his new bride, he looked at the servant with such anger in his eyes, such scornfulness. But of course he couldn't tell the servant off in front of those people. That would be bad manners. They would not think of him a very kind husband. So he kept silent and entered the bride's home. And there the wedding ceremony carried as normally, as expected, with no surprises and no more incidents. And finally the newly married couple returned to the groom's home. It was to be their first night together, in their bridal chamber. As the sun set and the moon came out and the stars came out, the bride and groom retired to their room. And outside the room, which the bride and groom did not know, the faithful servant was waiting, armed with a sword, hidden under the veranda outside the chamber. He waited. And as soon as the bride and groom turned off the lights and went to bed, the servant opened the door and leapt inside. "Who's there?" startled the newlywed couple, surprised that somebody would walk in on them on their first wedding night. "Young master," said the servant solemnly. "I will explain later, but right now just hurry and get out of the way." And the young master, alarmed by this, indeed listened and stepped to the side. The servant kicked the bedding aside, lifting the mattress, and a terrible sight greeted their eyes. Hundreds of string snakes coiled and writhed in a single ball. They looked. Their hands went to their mouths and they gasped. And the servant with his sword slashed at the snakes. He cut some into pieces. They opened their red mouths and darted their black forked tongues at them. And other snakes slithered out of the room, some leaving the house. Chaos, panic. And the servant all this time whirled his sword this way and that. And finally, every last single one of those snakes remaining in that room were killed. The servant breathed a sigh of relief, for all the promises that he had heard from the story bag were finally dealt with. A single tear came down the face of the servant, and he let out a sigh, and he said, "Young master, I must explain my strange actions for the last couple of days." And the bridegroom indeed nodded. And the old servant began to tell the story on how that night on the little hook on the wall he had heard the whispers that had come from the story bag on the wall. And the bridegroom listened, nodded, understood. And so a choice was made. From that day onwards, the bridegroom opened that tightly closed bag and released the stories so they could find freedom, so that they could take new lives, so they could walk the earth and swim the oceans, so that the story prisoners would not try and harm him and kill him again. And he released the story so that they could find freedom, and he could find freedom. He released the story so they could find life, and he could keep his life. Let's not think of being tormented forevermore. Let's not think of the ways that the stories would harm him if they are not released and respected and let go. Like doves, like eagles with wide wings, flying across the winds, across the skies. And this is why, as the story says, when stories are heard, they must never be stored away, tightly pushed inside a bag to become mean and spiteful, but shared with other people and released. And that way, they carry on living their own lives, their own freedom, bringing joy and hope to whoever listens. I hope you enjoyed the story of the story bag and why it's important not to keep stories close for too long. Share them with people in whatever way is possible. Sometimes sharing does need to have rules. Sometimes this is the only way to respect the stories. And sometimes the sharing will be as free and liberal as possible. But one thing is certain: stories untouched, just hung in the wall, that are not worked with, that are not spent time with, that are not courted, get lonely. And so it's important to work with stories, to be their companion, to give them as much as they give us, to be respectful towards them, loving towards them, not change their colour, not disrespect them, and honour them for their beauty, for their wisdom, for their knowledge, for the culture they come from, for the way they make us feel, for the lessons they give us. The stories give us so much. They have done for millennia. And they will carry on giving us so much for millennia too. And so I hope you enjoyed this tale, and I hope that you enjoy the stories I share here and the book that I've written, with stories that I have let out of my heart and into this world to be respected and loved and enjoyed, knowing that a part of me is in every one of those stories, in the way they've been written or translated. Their trueness, their likeness, their soul has been kept, of course. But they're not closely packed in a bag and forgotten about on the wall. They're living and breathing, and their heartbeats are close to mine, and maybe close to yours. Have a wonderful month, and I hope to see you at the book launch, either in person or online. And if not, then I'll see you in this podcast next month. If you enjoy it, then maybe tell someone, or leave me a 5-star review, or buy me a coffee at Ko-fi. I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you for choosing to spend a wee while listening to this tale. I hope that you carry it with you like a treasure in your pocket, and I look forward to seeing you soon next month for the beautiful few weeks. And come again, and maybe bring a friend. See you soon. Go well. Goodbye for now. Thank you to In Feathers, as always, for the beautiful music.